The focus of today's show is channeling as an ally in psychotherapy. I have a guest by the name of Steven Weber who is going to be talking about that in detail. And Steven, being a therapist and also a channel, will later in the show be channeling his wonderful being friend whose name is Sandi. The name of this show is Living Wisdom, and I'm Patty. I want to introduce my guest, Steven Weber, and welcome to the show, Steven.
Thank you.
I read your master's thesis recently on how to use channeling as an ally in psychotherapy. And so, of course, that's what I'd like you to explain to us, because I think it's a pretty unique concept for most people. I know it is to me.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll let you roll with that. How did you get involved in that, and how is it an asset for you?
Well, I decided to go back to school in 1995 to get a degree in counseling psychology. And at the time, I had also just started to learn to channel. And while I was learning how to do psychotherapy, the entity that I was working with, Sandi, started to talk to me a little bit about trying to find a way to bridge the two. How do you bridge psychotherapy with channeling? There's a lot of similarities between the two. And so as I began to study more and more in terms of how to use psychotherapy as a healing tool, and as I was learning how to use channeling as a healing tool, there seemed to be a bridge. Mm-hmm. There seemed to be places where they overlapped. And I thought, well, let me look into this a little bit deeper. Well, one way in which I did that, I started to study the history of oracle speaking.
Oh.
And tried to find threads that would lead to channeling, to the idea of channeling. Now, there's a very unique and very ancient origin to the concept of channeling, which has shamanic origins, has origins in ancient Greece, in terms of the Oracle of Delphi, through the spiritualist movement of the 19th century to the channels of the 20th century. And I decided that, well, as I was studying more and more, I thought, well, this is certainly an outgrowth. This is definitely similarities between the two. Mm-hmm. And as I went deeper into working with channeling, I realized that the only difference between, well, there's several differences. One of the only differences is a person's concept, a person's belief on what is channeling, and whether or not that can be used in what would be considered a more traditional approach to healing.
When you say the person, you mean the client or the patient, what their beliefs about it would be?
Well, actually, the client, the patient, as well as the professors, the therapists,
okay.
the academia in general.
Oh, yes, okay.
That have certain understandings of what channeling is, mm-hmm. based on, well, popular culture. Right. In terms of channeling. Now, we all know of channeling being from the 60s, the 70s, yeah, the 80s,
more
and so
of
forth.
an entertainment, ooh, isn't that neat kind of energy going on.
Exactly. And in some ways, it got a bad rap.
It did.
It got a bad rap. And so I think traditional and more conservative schools probably wouldn't have accepted the idea of my writing a thesis, mm-hmm. a master's thesis on channeling and psychotherapy. But fortunately, I went to a school that was quite open to the idea, and it was a wonderful experience. One of the things that I did do is I started to practice more and more with my channeling. I would have, as I was writing, well, actually doing more of the research, I would have people come over. I worked with a very close friend of mine, a very dear friend of mine that you know as well, as Beverly Dorn.
Oh, yes.
As my witness and facilitator of doing this process, because again, I was doing both simultaneously. And we would have once, sometimes twice a week, people that would come over, and I would practice my channeling. We would record the session, and then I would get their permission. The intention was that I would anonymously use some of that information to talk about the healing process and try and find threads and try and find bridges between the work that I was doing as a channel with trying to fit that in a psychotherapeutic model. So we did that for almost a year and a half, and I compiled about 800 pages of transcripts, going through trying to find threads, trying to find things that I could work with to see whether or not the way that Sandi worked with a client was very similar to the way that a psychotherapist would work with a client. Only what were the differences? How could I compare? How could I contrast? And so as I started going through all the material, I realized that that wasn't the direction. That wasn't the right direction for this thesis, that I had to take a more theoretical approach, that it was going to be more valuable if I looked at a bit of the history and created a basis. Then I would take psychological theories and look at some of the prominent theorists, psychologists, scholars on the subject, and see whether or not I could find something in their work that either spoke directly to the concept of channeling or indirectly. And I found a tremendous amount of information. A Jungian approach, a transpersonal approach. And it really was quite fascinating. The more that I dug, the more research that I did, the more that I found that, in fact, there is a basis, that there is a commonality between the two, and that, in fact, quite a number of scholars and psychologists have used channeling in some way or another, maybe not calling it that, and in most cases not calling it channeling.
Because they had the same apprehensions that you had, probably.
Exactly, exactly. And so once I started to do that, it gave me a certain confidence or a certain kind of what I thought of credibility to a degree.
Well, you weren't stepping out on untried ice all by yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then what I did was I started to talk about, in the thesis, I started talking about my own experience, how I got into channeling, and the experiences that I had, but looking at it from a psychotherapeutic approach, from a healing approach. How did the work that I did as a recipient of channeled discourse, as a recipient of being in that environment, as you have so often, how was I healed by that? And
that's a good point. Let's go right into that right now, because I think that will be very interesting to whoever is watching to find out the practical use of that. I know from my own experience with the channel beings that it has helped me tremendously in my own growth, working with my shadow self, another tribute to Jung there. But yeah, in a practical sense, Stephen, how did that channeling impact your own growth?
Well, quite remarkably, actually.
You can give perhaps some instances without revealing too much of the issues you were working with.
Well, I would say probably, and again I talk about this in the thesis, I think one of the most impactful work that I had done actually was with, and has been with, Lazarus, our dear friend. And there was a meditation that I had worked with, and it was actually in a seminar where it was so real, it was so vivid. It was as real as I'm sitting here at the moment, and it was a meditation with the goddess, and it was actually my second workshop that I had ever done, and it was in the late 1980s, and it was a goddess workshop, and in that meditation I was surrounded by and held by the goddess, and I literally could feel the touch. And it was that moving and that healing to feel as if she knew my name, she knew who I was, And it was so impactful that it started for me a new direction. It started a healing process. It started a beginning of a self-exploration that literally changed my
Yeah,
life.
it really makes us understand the realness of it,
Yes.
when we can feel that energy and
Yes.
all of that. Mhm.
Yes, yes. And meditation, just doing meditations, and certainly the more and more I do meditation and practice meditation and visualizations and so forth, I think each time probably has another effect on my being from a healing standpoint.
And when you work with Sandi on your own personal issues, and I presume you've done some of that?
Somewhat, but honestly, I think that's probably for me the most difficult.
Oh.
And that's what I'm learning to do in my process as a channel, is to apply and to work with Sandi in terms of my own work.
Well then, maybe if it's comfortable for you, Stephen, to talk about how Sandi has worked with others, of course being discreet, not using anyone's names, but maybe you can give an example or two of issues that some of your friends that you've worked with in this way, issues that they've been confronting, encountering in their own lives, and then perhaps how Sandi has gotten some insights on that. Is that something you can talk about?
Yeah, and again, it still relates somewhat to the psychotherapy. The same individuals, let's say, that I work with, and some of them do see therapists, and they do have their therapists, will work with them, in essence, human to human, talking about a certain dimensionality, 3D, 4D, whatever it is,
Right.
A certain way in which they work, and certain insights that will come as a result. I found that working with Sandi and in general, that you really do have, working with with an entity in that way, is that you have a multidimensional approach. So they're bringing in other insights that a therapist, traditional therapist, might not be able to see, feel, work with.
Right.
So we're talking about, for example, an etheric body. One thing that Sandi does, and I think that people have found it extremely useful, is Sandi will do a blending with someone and be able to feel their etheric body, what's happening outside, just a little bit outside of what you and I can see in that way. And oftentimes it will be, his insights will be based on a certain energy, a certain color, a certain feeling, and will begin to explain to that person, for example, feeling someone that I recently worked with, or that Sandi recently worked with, was having difficulty. They had a head cold and they were having some physical symptoms, but they were also dealing with issues of receiving love and being loved. And what Sandi talked about saw in the fourth chakra area a very deep green base in this area here, and really talking about their chakras and talking about, yes, there's a foundation there for this person, that yes, they are able to, and they are confident in their ability to love and be loved. But as it went up, as the color scheme went up, it began to fade, and it faded more and more and more until it was almost white as it reached the fifth chakra area. And basically saying, and they were congested. And so this congestion coming up into the head and feeling it in this area, and really Sandi started to talk to them about trying to strengthen that fourth chakra, basically trying to replace them, or working with meditations to replace the chakras, but specifically working with that fourth chakra to strengthen it, and also to just visualize. Visualize the colors changing, visualize it strengthening, visualize the green getting deeper like this, just working with it in that way. So Sandi will do that kind of work, which has been, from what I understand, quite positive.
Well, that's intriguing, and I think that's a great setup for perhaps allowing you to go into your process, allowing you to bring Sandi in, and we've got about 13 more minutes to the show. So if that works for you,
Sure.
Stephen, let's open up and invite Sandi to come in. This may take a few minutes, so we'll have a little quiet time here as the camera focuses on Stephen and watches the process.
Ah, yes, well. Just wait a moment. Yes. Patty, it is a pleasure for us to be here with you today. Yes.
Welcome to this show, Sandi.
Yes.
And I've not communicated with you before in this way, so it's just a very big treat for me to have you here.
Yes, it's true. We've certainly known of your work, and we know that the channel has been a friend and an acquaintance for quite a number of years in the work that you've done together with Lazarus, as was mentioned earlier, certainly, and we welcome the opportunity to be here, and we certainly know that the channel does as well, and yes, it is a pleasure to work with you, certainly.
It's great fun. Stephen was talking about the fact that what you often do is do a reading or kind of a scan of energy. So I invite you to do that with me, Sandi.
Yes. Well. Usually, what we do when we're working with someone that we haven't worked with before is what we do is we explain prior to doing this blending, this scan, if you will, is in fact to explain that there are areas that it is an intimate, of course, to a degree, it's an intimate interaction, blending of energies in that way. And what we do is we explain that, in fact, there are areas that are very private, that are private to you, and we want to say that we will not intrude in any way with those areas, and even those areas that are private, that are still even undiscovered, yes, by you. And with that we ask permission to do that blend, and so we're asking your permission, Patty, and we understand that you in fact have given it.
Yes, and I give it again, Sandi.
Yes, so we'll just ask you to just relax, to just sit back and relax, and with your eyes open or eyes closed, it matters not, or you may feel our energy or not. Again, either way, perfectly fine. Yes, well. Yes. We'll ask you, did you feel anything in terms of our blending?
Yes.
Yes.
I feel energy.
Yes. A tingle or a...
Yes, the way it worked was as though my seventh chakra were opening, and I felt energy flow in a discrete amount.
Yes. Yes. Well, what we're sensing, and of course just initially, and of course given more time, of course we could develop, go further in terms of our interpretations and discussions. But initially what we're sensing, and it seems to be quite apropos for the environment and for the moment, excuse us, would be a very deep, a very strong blue in this area, yes, in your fifth chakra area. And so what we're also understanding is that, of course, this is part of the process. You're hosting the show and working the way that you are in terms of your communication skills and abilities. And we sense that very strongly, and in terms of your working in that area, that you're finding rewards for the work that you're doing. Is that right?
Oh, yes, in the sense of loving doing this show. It's a joy to me.
Yes.
That is a reward.
Yes, we're sensing it radiates. Yes, that fifth chakra is absolutely radiating. And at the same time, what we sense is that there's a bit of, well, it's more of an energy than it is a color, is a bit of a pressure on the shoulder area on both sides, a pressure that's in fact pushing, it's weighing on you, it's pushing down, so to speak, is the way in which the energy feels. So what we're suggesting is perhaps there's a relationship between the two. There's a relationship between the newfound expression and the development of your communication abilities and your visibility and your desire, in fact, to carry and to talk about what it is that is important to you, to talk about your passion, being your spirituality and your metaphysics, and to share that. And at the same time, there seems to be a pressure, a weight. We don't want to necessarily burden, because it's not really a burden, but it's a pressure. Perhaps you could give us a bit. Does that make any sense to you?
Yes. Oh, yes, it does make sense. There is a part of me that feels a pressure to be good enough to share these valuable, this valuable information to the best of my ability, and so I guess I still have some self-doubts about whether I'm up to the job or not. Maybe that kind of pressure?
Yes, perhaps. Also something that's more, well, it's personal, and again we're sensing and not wanting to go too deep into the intimate issues, of course, having perhaps to do with family pressure. Is there... perhaps even spiritual family. We want to say friends, but it is more. It's
yes.
It's stronger.
Oh, yes. I get that. I have many friends who are metaphysicians who share a similar path with mine. We've had a number of the same teachers, such as Lazarus.
Yes.
Oh yes, so maybe it's kind of, I see myself as the one who in this way is stepping out, and so I've got a big responsibility.
Yes, yes.
Oh, that's a new take on it, Sandy. I hadn't looked at that before.
It seems that perhaps we've found a bit that could be expanded upon in that way. Yes, that perhaps there's the burden. We use the word burden. It's less that, but it's more of a responsibility.
Responsibility.
Yes.
I relate to that.
Yes, a responsibility to put forth. Yes, to use your abilities, your communication skills, and to put forth this on behalf of those that perhaps aren't in a position to do that. And there's quite a weight there for you. There's quite a feeling of responsibility. And Deirdre, what we would suggest is that you begin to shed some of that burden. It's quite unnecessary for you to feel as though you have to carry the torch for all of those that perhaps are not as eager to, well, we don't want to say that it's proselytizing in terms of spreading the word, but there's a part of you that feels as though that perhaps you need to do that on behalf of others. Does that make any sense?
Yes, I'm, you know, intellectually I could have perhaps found that on my own, but to get this feedback gives me, I get the sense of it, the gut feeling about what you're saying, Sandy. So I definitely can work on my own to shift that. I've just gotten the cue that we only have about a minute left.
Yes.
But we will be taping another show, so
wonderful.
Maybe we can get into this deeper, or some other things that you and I can talk about.
Yes,
anyway,
absolutely.
for this time, I'd like to thank you once again for being present, and I look forward to having you on the show again. And the name of the show again is Living Wisdom, and I'm Patty Paul, saying goodbye until the next time.